There are places in the world that don't just exist on a map. They do something. People go there expecting scenery, history, or silence, and leave with something else entirely. Vivid dreams that don't behave like dreams. Thoughts that feel clearer than they should. Emotional weightlifting without explanation. A sense of understanding that arrives fully formed, without logic, and then refuses to be translated into words. These aren't places where miracles happen in public. Nothing dramatic announces itself. No lights in the sky. No voices, just a subtle shift, as if the environment itself is tuned to a different frequency, and the human mind, if it's quiet enough, starts to resonate with it. Sensitive people often feel it first. After one night, sleep becomes deeper and stranger. Dreams feel structured, purposeful. Some wake with answers to questions they didn't know how to ask. Others wake unsettled, aware that something inside them has moved. Across cultures and centuries, these locations have been described the same way. Not as symbols, but as concentrations. Places where spiritual energy pools, where the distance between the human mind and something greater narrows just enough to be felt. Science offers partial explanations: geology, electromagnetism, psychology. None of them fully account for why these places keep producing the same effects on different people in different eras without coordination. What's consistent isn't belief. It's an experience. In this video, we're looking at 10 locations around the world that have earned a reputation not for what they show, but for what they awaken. Places that don't promise answers, yet have a way of providing them anyway. Not by force, not by revelation, but by quietly removing the noise long enough for something else to be heard. 1. Rila Mountains, Bulgaria. Rila doesn't announce itself as strange. There are no warning signs, no legends shoved in your face, no obvious sense that something is wrong. At first glance, it's just a mountain range, quiet, high, cold, and vast. Pine forests, glacial lakes, wind that never seems to fully stop moving, the kind of place people go to clear their heads. But people who stay long enough usually notice something else. Not fear, not danger, just pressure. A feeling like the air is heavier than it should be. Like your thoughts aren't entirely private anymore. Rila is considered one of the world's major energy centers, something you'll hear dismissed quickly if you bring it up in scientific circles. And yet, the idea didn't come from modern spiritual tourism or internet mysticism. It's been whispered about locally for generations, long before anyone was marketing vortexes or ley lines. What's unsettling is how consistent the reports are. People who camp near the 7 Rila lakes often describe the same patterns. Vivid dreams that feel unusually structured, repeating symbols, conversations with people who don't exist, time distortion, hours that feel compressed, or nights that feel unreasonably long. Some wake up exhausted despite sleeping deeply. Others wake up energized but emotionally raw, as if something has been stirred loose. And many don't talk about it afterward. Not because it was terrifying, but because it's hard to explain without sounding unstable. One of the most intriguing aspects of Rila is its connection to Bainsa Duno, also known as Peter Dunov, one of the most influential spiritual teachers of the 20th century. Unlike many figures later associated with power places, Duno wasn't drawn to Rila accidentally, nor did he frame it as a mystical tourist destination. He treated it as something functional. According to his teachings, Rila wasn't just spiritually significant. It was active, a place where forces normally dormant in the earth were closer to the surface. He believed the mountains acted like a conductor, allowing energy to flow more freely between the planet and human consciousness. Skeptical or not, it's hard to ignore that Duno didn't choose Rila symbolically. He brought followers there repeatedly. He taught there, he practiced there, and he insisted that certain areas, particularly around the lakes, were not suitable for everyone. He warned that some people would feel clarity, while others would feel disorientation. That exposure without preparation could lead to emotional instability, that the mountain didn't care who you were, It simply amplified what you carried inside. That alone is an odd thing for a teacher to say. Even today, people who hike Rila alone often report a strange shift after the first night. Thoughts become louder. Memories surface uninvited. Old emotions resurface with surprising intensity. Not trauma, necessarily, but unresolved things. Conversations you never finished. Decisions you never made. It's as if the mountain removes whatever psychological buffer normally keeps those thoughts quiet. Scientists who've studied the area note that Rila sits at a unique geological intersection. Deep fault lines, high mineral concentration, strong geomagnetic activity. These are the kinds of features that, in other parts of the world, are associated with navigation anomalies, equipment malfunctions, and altered perception in sensitive individuals. Compasses don't fail outright, but they behave inconsistently. GPS signals drift more than expected. Batteries drain faster in certain pockets near the lakes. Nothing dramatic enough to make headlines, just enough to be irritating if you're trying to measure it precisely, which is usually where the conversation ends. But locals don't talk about Rila like it's broken. They talk about it like it's awake. There's an old belief that the mountains act as a threshold, a place where the boundary between internal and external experience thins. You don't see things that aren't there. You feel things you normally ignore. And for some people, that sensation crosses into something harder to categorize. There are hikers who report hearing music with no source, not echoes, not wind, structured melodies that fade when acknowledged. Others describe footsteps matching their pace, stopping when they stop, resuming when they move again. No panic, no sense of threat, just presence. The unsettling part isn't the phenomena themselves, it's how mundane people describe them afterward. No hysteria, no dramatic language, just confusion. I thought it was normal there. That phrase comes up a lot. What makes Rila especially difficult to dismiss is that it doesn't behave like a classic, haunted location. There are no stories of violent encounters, possessions, or apparitions. Instead, it affects cognition, emotional processing, dream architecture, subtle perception, the kind of effects that are hardest to prove and easiest to ignore. Some researchers have suggested that prolonged exposure to fluctuating electromagnetic fields can influence the brain's temporal lobe activity, which can, in theory, heighten pattern recognition, induce vivid dreams, and create a sense of presence. It's a tidy explanation. It also doesn't explain why the same specific experiences cluster in the same specific locations within the mountain range, nor why certain people feel nothing at all. Rila doesn't seem to work on everyone. That selectivity is what makes it uncomfortable. Bain Saduno reportedly believed that the mountain interacted with individuals differently depending on internal alignment, a concept that sounds vague until you notice how often visitors describe the experience as deeply personal, not shared hallucinations, not group panic, private encounters that feel tailored. And then there's the silence afterward. Unlike other mystery locations, Rila hasn't been aggressively mythologized. There's no mainstream narrative pushing a single explanation, no dramatic government involvement, no viral incidents, just thousands of small, unconnected experiences that never quite line up cleanly enough to force attention, which might be the strangest thing of all. If Rila were dangerous, people would warn you away from it. If it were fraudulent, someone would have exposed it by now. If it were imaginary, the stories would be inconsistent and chaotic. Instead, they're restrained, repetitive, almost cautious. People leave Rila with the sense that something happened, but that whatever it was, it didn't want to be named. And maybe that's the real reason it still feels powerful, not because it proves anything supernatural, but because it quietly interferes with the one thing humans rely on most, the assumption that reality always behaves the same way everywhere. Rila doesn't break that assumption loudly. It just bends it, slightly, until you notice. 2. Machu Picchu. Peru. Machu Picchu doesn't feel abandoned. That's the first thing people notice, and the hardest thing to explain. Cities that are truly ruins feel empty, weathered, settled into the past. Machu Picchu doesn't. It feels paused, like something stepped away briefly and never quite came back. But could. Even before you reach it, something feels off. The altitude plays a role, sure. Thin air messes with your breathing, your pulse, your focus. But seasoned hikers, people used to high elevations, often say this feels different, sharper, more intrusive, as if the environment is doing more than just stressing your lungs. The Incas didn't build Machu Picchu where it is by accident. They never did anything by accident. It sits high in the Andes, balanced between mountain peaks, positioned at a convergence point, geographical, geological, and possibly something else entirely. The site aligns with cardinal directions, solstices, celestial events, and surrounding landmarks with an accuracy that's unsettling when you remember it was built without metal tools, wheels, or modern surveying equipment. And then there's the stonework. The blocks fit together so tightly that you can't slide a blade between them. No mortar, no adhesive, just precision. But what's often overlooked is what those stones are made of. Granite, rich in quartz, a mineral known for its piezoelectric properties. Under pressure, it generates electrical charge. Now put that material at extreme altitude, along fault lines, in an area with frequent seismic microactivity. And suddenly you're not just looking at architecture, you're looking at a system. That's where the energy center idea stops sounding poetic and starts sounding mechanical. Visitors describe sensations that don't map neatly onto awe or inspiration. Some feel waves of emotion with no trigger. Others report pressure in the chest or forehead, dizziness that comes and goes abruptly, a sense of being watched, not by something hostile, but by something attentive. Time behaves strangely here too. People swear they lose track of minutes without distraction. That conversations feel stretched. That silence feels louder than it should. Some say the place feels larger on the inside than it looks from above, as if the space doesn't quite obey normal proportions. And then there are the dreams. People who stay nearby often report dreams that feel vivid, symbolic, and unusually coherent. Not random imagery, but structured narratives, encounters, lessons, moments that linger emotionally long after waking. It's not uncommon for visitors to wake up convinced they were shown something, only to struggle to articulate what that was once daylight returns. The Incas believed certain places were alive, not metaphorically, literally. They referred to them as huacas, sacred sites where the spiritual and physical worlds overlapped. Machu Picchu was one of the most important. But here's what's unsettling. It wasn't a city for the masses. There's no evidence it housed a large permanent population. No signs of commercial sprawl. No defensive walls. It appears to have been reserved for elites, priests, initiates, people who were prepared to be there. That alone raises a question no one likes to sit with. Prepared for what? Some researchers believe Machu Picchu functioned as a ceremonial or initiation site, a place where individuals underwent transformation, spiritual, psychological, or otherwise. That theory lines up disturbingly well with modern reports of emotional upheaval and altered perception. People don't just visit Machu Picchu. They come back changed, or shaken, or oddly quiet about the experience. There are also the magnetic anomalies. In certain areas, compasses drift. Instruments give inconsistent readings. Nothing dramatic enough to ground flights or trigger alarms, but enough to frustrate engineers trying to map it precisely. And it's not uniform. The fluctuations appear stronger in specific zones, particularly near ceremonial structures, which suggests intentional placement. The Incas had no concept of electromagnetism as we define it, but they absolutely understood the effects of certain locations. They built where the land felt different, where the ground responded, where something could be tapped into. That's why some people describe Machu Picchu not as a power source, but as a conduit, a place where something passes through. What that something is depends on who you ask. Earth energy, cosmic alignment, consciousness amplification, or just a complex interaction between geology, altitude, and human neurobiology. But even skeptics admit this. Machu Picchu does not feel neutral. Some visitors feel overwhelmed to the point of needing to leave early. Others feel calm, focused, almost euphoric. A few experience sudden emotional releases, crying without sadness, relief without cause. And then there are those who feel like they don't belong there at all. Not unwelcome, just incompatible. That reaction mirrors something noted in historical accounts. Certain individuals were not permitted access to sacred Incan sites, not because they were unworthy, but because exposure was believed to be destabilizing. That's not mysticism, that's risk management. What makes Machu Picchu deeply unsettling isn't that it feels magical, it's that it feels functional. As if it was built to do something, and still does. Not constantly, not predictably, but enough that people notice. Enough that no single explanation ever fully closes the case. If Machu Picchu were just beautiful, that would be easy. If it were just mysterious, that would be marketable. If it were just ancient, it would feel distant. Instead, it feels present, like a place designed to interact with the human mind in ways we no longer understand and may never fully admit we feel. And that's why so many people leave with the same unsettling thought, phrased differently every time. It didn't feel like it belonged entirely to our world. Not because something entered ours, but because for a moment it felt like we stepped into someone else's. 3. Socotra Archipelago, Indian Ocean. Socotra doesn't feel like a remote island. It feels like a mistake. Not in the sense that it's hostile or broken, but in the sense that it seems misplaced, like a fragment of some other version of Earth that drifted loose and settled here by accident. You don't arrive and think this is beautiful. You arrive and think this shouldn't be here. The landscape looks unfinished or experimental. Trees shaped like umbrellas turned inside out. Plants that resemble coral more than vegetation. Trunks that bleed red sap when cut, as if the island itself has a circulatory system. More than a third of its plant life exists nowhere else on Earth. Not similar, not related, nowhere. Biologists usually frame this as isolation, millions of years cut off from the rest of the world. Evolution doing its thing, without interference. That explanation works on paper. It works less well when you're standing there, because Socotra doesn't just look alien, it feels alien. The scale is wrong. The silence behaves strangely. The wind moves differently, as if it's navigating around something invisible. Even seasoned travelers describe a subtle but persistent sense of dislocation, like their internal compass can't quite lock on. People often say it feels prehistoric. That's close, but not quite right. Prehistoric implies before us. Socotra feels parallel. The archipelago sits off the Horn of Africa in the Indian Ocean, isolated enough that human influence arrived late and never fully took hold. There are no megacities, no overwhelming infrastructure, no constant electronic noise, just rock, wind, salt, and life that followed rules slightly different from the rest of the planet. And then there's what people feel there. Not awe, not fear. Connection. Visitors talk about an intense sense of clarity, sometimes uncomfortable clarity. Thoughts slow down. Internal noise drops away. Some describe feeling watched, but not by anything external. More like being observed by the environment itself, as if the island is aware of them simply by existing around them. Meditation practitioners report unusually deep states with very little effort. Others with no spiritual background at all find themselves sitting silently for long periods without intending to. Time stretches. Hours pass unnoticed. Sleep becomes vivid and heavy with symbolic dreams. Dreams are a recurring theme on Socotra. People dream of vast distances, of stars, of floating, of conversations without language. These aren't chaotic dreams. They're structured, calm, almost instructional. Many wake with the unsettling sense that something made sense during the dream that can't quite survive being awake. Locals don't dramatize this. They talk about the island as if it's simply closer to something, not haunted, not magical, just thin, as if the barrier between the human mind and the larger universe is reduced here. That idea shows up in different cultures in different ways. Some describe Socotra as a place where the soul can stretch. Others say it's easier to remember who you were before the world got loud. What's interesting is how little resistance the island seems to offer to introspection. In most places, you have to try to disconnect. Here, disconnection happens automatically. Phones feel irrelevant. Schedules lose urgency. Even anxiety, normally stubborn, softens around the edges. Not disappears, softens. That's not typical of extreme environments. Deserts, mountains, jungles, they usually heighten survival instinct. Socotra does the opposite. It quiets them. There are geological oddities too. Ancient limestone plateaus, caves that run deeper than expected, subterranean systems that remain poorly mapped. Some researchers have noted unusual acoustic properties in certain areas, sounds carrying farther than they should, or behaving oddly when echoed. Again, nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarm, just off. What makes Socotra especially unsettling is that it doesn't try to impress you. There's no moment where the island announces itself. The effect builds slowly, subtly. A day passes, then another. And at some point you realize your internal reference points have shifted. You're calmer, but also more exposed. People report sudden emotional insights they didn't ask for. Old priorities rearranging themselves quietly. Questions surfacing that were buried under routine. Not revelations, but reordering. Some leave feeling lighter. Others leave unsettled. A few leave early. Because while the connection Socotra seems to offer is often described as cosmic, it isn't comforting in a sentimental way. It doesn't affirm you. It doesn't reassure you. It doesn't care whether you're ready. It simply strips away interference. And without interference, people are left alone with themselves, and with something much larger pressing gently at the edges of awareness. Skeptics argue this is just the psychological effect of extreme isolation paired with an unfamiliar ecosystem. Remove distraction, add novelty, and the brain fills in the rest. That explanation accounts for some of it. It doesn't explain why people with wildly different backgrounds describe the experience in eerily similar terms, nor why some feel nothing at all. Socotra doesn't seem to affect everyone equally. Some visitors walk away impressed, but unchanged. Others describe it as one of the most significant internal experiences of their lives, without being able to say why. That selectivity is uncomfortable. If the island were simply beautiful, everyone would feel it. If it were simply strange, reactions would vary wildly. Instead, the responses cluster. Quiet, expansive, cosmic, grounded, disorienting. Words that usually don't sit together. There's a theory, rarely taken seriously, that certain places act as psychological resonators, not energy sources in a sci-fi sense, but environments where the human nervous system synchronizes differently with its surroundings. If such places exist, Socotra fits the profile disturbingly well. It's not trying to wake you up. It's not trying to teach you anything. It just places you in a state where something else can be felt more easily. And once you feel that, even briefly, it's hard to unfeel it. That's why Socotra lingers, not as a memory of sites or species, but as a sense that the world you return to is louder than it needs to be, that the distance between your inner life and the wider universe might not be as vast as you were taught. Socotra doesn't prove anything supernatural. It doesn't demand belief. It doesn't offer answers. It just quietly suggests that Earth has corners where the human mind lines up differently with everything else. And whether that's biology, psychology, or something we haven't named yet, the island doesn't seem particularly concerned with which explanation you choose. 4. Uluru, Australia. Uluru doesn't rise out of the landscape. It interrupts it. For hundreds of kilometers, the land is flat, dry, repetitive, until suddenly it isn't. A single mass of stone stands in the middle of the continent, so large and so abrupt that it feels less like a mountain and more like something that arrived there. From a distance, it looks solid, permanent, immovable. Up close, it feels occupied, not by people, by story. Uluru is often described as the spiritual center of Australia, but that phrasing is misleading. Centers imply symmetry, balance, geometry. Uluru doesn't feel balanced. It feels concentrated, like something enormous has been compressed into one place and never dispersed. The Anangu people, the traditional custodians of the land, don't talk about Uluru as a sacred site so much as a sacred process. They call it Tujukurpa, often translated as dream time, though the word dream does it no favors. This isn't sleep imagery or imagination. It's law, memory, creation, and consciousness layered together into something continuous. Dreamtime isn't something that happened in the past. It's something that's still happening. That distinction matters. According to Anangu belief, Uluru is not a symbol of spiritual energy. It is a source of it. The rock itself is a physical record of events that occurred during dreamtime. Stories of ancestral beings moving across the land, shaping reality as they went. Their actions weren't erased when they left. They were imprinted. Those imprints are everywhere. Carved into caves, etched into rock faces, embedded in grooves and fissures that don't look random once you're told what they represent. Some markings are public, others are not meant to be discussed at all. Certain areas are restricted, not out of secrecy, but because exposure is believed to be harmful to the unprepared. That alone should give pause. Modern visitors often report strange experiences at Uluru, but what's notable is how understated those reports usually are. No dramatic visions of spirits walking across the plains. No booming voices. Instead, people describe sensations that creep in quietly. A sudden emotional weight, an unprompted sense of reverence, an overwhelming urge to be still. Some feel disoriented, like their sense of scale has shifted. Others feel unusually grounded, as if gravity itself is slightly stronger here. Time becomes slippery. Minutes stretch. Thoughts slow down, not in a relaxed way, but in a deliberate one, like something is forcing attention inward. And then, there are the visions. Not hallucinations. Not images superimposed on reality. More like internal scenes that arrive fully formed. People describe flashes of landscapes they've never seen, figures moving without faces, snippets of narrative that feel ancient but unfamiliar. These experiences rarely come with interpretation, just impressions, emotional residues. Many people don't even label them as visions until later, when they realize how different they felt from imagination or memory. The Anangu have always said this happens. They believe that when someone travels to Uluru, the land interacts with them directly. Not everyone, not all the time, but enough that it's considered normal rather than exceptional. The land decides what you see, or whether you see anything at all. That idea doesn't sit comfortably with modern thinking. We prefer experiences to be predictable, reproducible, optional. Uluru doesn't seem interested in that arrangement. Geologically, the rock is ancient, hundreds of millions of years old. It contains minerals that retain heat and energy long after sunset, creating dramatic temperature shifts between day and night. The surrounding desert is electromagnetically quiet compared to urban environments, with minimal artificial interference. In other words, it's a perfect place for the nervous system to behave differently. Strip away constant noise, strip away artificial light, strip away familiar landmarks. What's left is a human mind forced to synchronize with something much older and much larger. Some researchers suggest that this alone could explain the altered states people experience. Sensory deprivation mixed with awe, cultural priming, and environmental extremes. It's a clean explanation. It doesn't explain why similar reports existed long before tourists' books or cameras. It doesn't explain why certain caves were known for specific types of visions, or why elders warned that some knowledge, if encountered too early, could cause psychological harm. That level of caution implies experience, not metaphor. What makes Uluru unsettling isn't that it feels mystical, it's that it feels intentional, as if the place was designed, not built, but shaped, to hold and transmit information in a way that isn't linear or verbal. The stories carved into the surrounding caves aren't decorative. They're not historical records in the usual sense. They're closer to compressed data, narratives meant to be activated through presence rather than read. You don't study Uluru. You're exposed to it. That exposure affects people differently. Some feel nothing beyond admiration for the landscape. Some feel deeply uncomfortable without knowing why. Others feel a sense of recognition that doesn't belong to their personal history. And then there are those who feel like they're intruding, not trespassing, intruding, as if the place doesn't reject them, but doesn't fully accept them either. That feeling often intensifies at night. Under the stars, Uluru changes character. The rock absorbs light during the day and releases it slowly, glowing faintly even in near darkness. Sounds travel farther. Footsteps feel amplified. The silence presses in rather than recedes. People report hearing movement when nothing is there, not threatening, just present, as if the land itself is adjusting around them. The Anangu say Uluru listens, not metaphorically, literally. That belief is easy to dismiss until you notice how instinctively people lower their voices there, how conversations fade without agreement, how laughter feels out of place, even among groups who didn't plan to be quiet. Uluru enforces a certain behavior without instruction. That's rare. Most places require rules, signs, explanations. Uluru doesn't. It exerts influence passively. The longer you stay, the more noticeable it becomes. And when people leave, they often struggle to articulate what happened. Not because nothing happened, but because it didn't fit into a story with a beginning and an end. Dreamtime doesn't move forward. It loops. It overlays. Uluru exists inside that loop, which may be why so many visitors describe the experience not as spiritual enlightenment, but as a temporary dislocation from ordinary reality. A sense that the world they returned to afterward felt thinner, louder, less anchored. Uluru doesn't convince you of anything. It doesn't demand belief. It doesn't offer answers. It simply places you in proximity to a system of meaning that predates explanation and continues operating whether you acknowledge it or not. And that's why, even now, with satellites overhead and tourists circling daily, Uluru still feels untouchable. Not because it's protected by law, but because it belongs to something older than ownership and doesn't particularly care whether you understand it. 5. Easter Island, Pacific Ocean. Easter Island looks small on a map. That's the first lie it tells. In reality, it feels disproportionately heavy, like the land carries more meaning than its size should allow. You can stand on one side of the island and see the ocean on the other, and still feel like you're standing in the center of something vast. The statues are impossible to ignore. The moai dominate every conversation about the island, as they're meant to. Enormous stone figures with oversized heads carved from volcanic rock, scattered across the landscape, some standing upright, some toppled, some half-buried, some abandoned mid-creation. Scientists argue endlessly about how they were made, how they were moved, how many people it would have taken. Ropes, rollers, walking techniques. None of the theories feel complete, and none explain why the statues were made this way in the first place. The moai don't feel decorative. They feel deployed. Many face inland, not out to sea, as if watching over something rather than guarding against it. Their placement follows patterns that are still debated. Some align with celestial events, others with underground features, others with nothing obvious at all, which raises a quieter question. What were they actually meant to do? Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, is one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth, thousands of kilometers from any major landmass. For centuries, it developed largely on its own. That isolation preserved more than just culture, it preserved intention. Across the island, there are unfinished statues left exactly where they were carved, as if work stopped abruptly, not gradually, not with signs of decline, just stopped. Tools dropped, figures frozen halfway between idea and execution. Then, there's the ceremonial village of Orongo, 53 stone houses built low to the ground. No windows, no conventional doors, structures you don't enter so much as crawl into. They feel defensive, but not against weather. Against something else. Ritualistic spaces tend to be symbolic. Orongo feels operational, like it was built for events that followed strict rules and precise conditions. But none of that compares to the island's most unsettling feature, Te Pito o Te Henua, the so-called navel of the world. At first glance, it's underwhelming. A smooth, circular stone surrounded by smaller rocks. No towering statue. No dramatic carving. Just a deliberate shape placed with care. And yet, this is the object the island's mythology treats with the most reverence. According to tradition, Te Pito o Te Henua holds the life force of the earth, a focal point where energy converges, a place where the boundaries between the human world and the larger cosmos thin to almost nothing. Visitors often report a strange sensation when touching it. Warmth, even when the stone should be cool. A subtle vibration, a sense of pressure in the hands or chest. Skeptics chalk it up to suggestion, but suggestion doesn't explain why compasses reportedly behave erratically nearby, or why some people feel dizzy while others feel unexpectedly calm, or why locals historically restricted access to it, treating the stone not as a relic, but as an active presence. What's unsettling is how the island seems designed around this idea of convergence. Statues placed like markers, villages positioned with ritual precision, structures aligned with the sky, the land, and something beneath it. It gives the impression of a system, one that doesn't require constant operation to remain functional, more like an infrastructure waiting to be activated. Researchers have proposed that Easter Island's builders believed in mana, a spiritual force that could be accumulated, stored, and transferred. The moai may have acted as conduits, channeling that energy across the island, protecting crops, people, and social order. That belief isn't metaphorical in its original context. Mana was treated as something measurable through effects, not belief, which makes the navel of the world less symbolic and more like a hub. And then there's the silence. Easter Island is unusually quiet, even when the wind is strong. Sound seems to dissipate quickly. Conversations drop off naturally. People lower their voices without realizing it. The effect is subtle, but consistent. Some visitors report the feeling of being observed, not by the statues themselves, but by the space between them, as if the island is aware of attention. Again, nothing dramatic, just presence. What makes Easter Island deeply unsettling isn't that it's mysterious. Mystery can be romantic, marketable. Easter Island feels unresolved, like a sentence that ends with a period where a question mark should be. Theories abound. Ecological collapse, cultural conflict, external contact. None fully explain why the system was abandoned, or whether it ever truly was. Because despite the absence of its original builders, the island doesn't feel inactive. People leave with a strange sense of incompleteness, as if they walked through the remains of something that wasn't finished, not in construction, but in purpose, as if the final step never happened, or hasn't happened yet. Te Pito o Te Henua still sits where it always has, untouched, unassuming, waiting, not demanding belief, not offering explanation, just existing as a reminder that some places weren't built to be understood by looking at them, but by standing in the middle of them and feeling the weight of what was meant to pass through. Easter Island doesn't tell you its secrets. It positions you close enough to realize they exist, and then leaves the rest uncomfortably open. 6. Sarmizegetusa Regia, Romania. Sarmizegetusa doesn't feel like ruins. It feels like a site that's been powered down, Hidden deep in the Oraste Mountains, far from modern roads and cities, it doesn't reveal itself easily. You have to climb for it. Walk through forest that grows denser than expected. Sound drops off. Signals weaken. And by the time you reach the stone platforms, the sense that you've crossed into a different mental space is already there. Not dramatic, just unmistakable. This was the capital of the Dacian kingdom before the Roman conquest. On paper, that makes it a historical site, strategically placed, fortified, politically important. In reality, almost nothing about Sarmizegetusa feels primarily political. The layout is wrong for a conventional capital. The most carefully constructed structures aren't defensive or residential. They're ceremonial. Stone circles, precision-cut platforms, terraces carved into the mountainside with mathematical consistency that feels excessive if your only goal is survival. The most famous structure is often compared to Stonehenge, a large circular arrangement of stone and wood posts, aligned with astronomical events. Officially, it's called a sanctuary. Unofficially, no one agrees what it was for. What's unsettling is how exact it is. The stones are carved from andesite, hard volcanic rock, cut and transported with a precision that shouldn't have been possible using the tools attributed to the Dacians. Some blocks weigh several tons. They're shaped uniformly, aligned deliberately, positioned in ways that suggest measurement, not ritual guesswork. This wasn't improvised spirituality. It was engineered. Researchers have noted that the site aligns with solstices, lunar cycles, and cardinal directions. But that's not unusual by ancient standards. What is unusual is how much of the city seems built around this single ceremonial complex, as if the entire settlement existed to support whatever happened there. And then there's the energy. People who visit Sarmizegetusa often describe a low-level physical sensation that starts after a few minutes of being still. Pressure in the chest, a faint buzzing in the ears, a sense of alertness that doesn't feel anxious, but isn't calm either, more like readiness. Some report dizziness, others report heightened focus. A few describe emotional reactions that feel disconnected from their thoughts. Sudden melancholy, sudden clarity, sudden unease. And then there are the visions, not common, not universal, but frequent enough to be documented. People describe flashes of imagery while standing in the stone circle. Geometric patterns, rotating shapes, symbols they don't recognize but feel familiar. A few describe the sensation of standing inside something rather than on top of it, as if the structure extends inward. What's strange is that these reports don't cluster around belief. Skeptics experience them. Spiritual tourists experience them. Historians experience them. There's no clean psychological profile. Locals have always known the place is different. Long before modern archaeology, the area was avoided at night. Shepherds would keep their flocks away after sunset. There are old stories of lights appearing in the forest, of humming sounds with no source, of people losing track of time while walking near the ruins. Not disappearing, just delayed. The Dacians believed deeply in the immortality of the soul. This wasn't philosophical optimism. It was operational belief. They behaved as if death was a transition, not an end. Their rituals, architecture, and social structures reflected that assumption. Some historians believe Sarmizegetusa functioned as a spiritual initiation center, a place where elites underwent rites meant to prepare them for contact with the divine, or with something beyond ordinary perception. That theory becomes uncomfortable when you consider Roman accounts. The Romans described the Dacian priests as unusually influential. Feared, even. They claimed the priests possessed knowledge that gave them power over the population, not through force, but through belief that felt justified. When the Romans finally conquered the city, they dismantled it systematically. Not just buildings, specific structures. The sanctuaries were targeted. Stones were removed. Platforms destroyed. That's not how conquerors usually behave. You occupy capitals. You repurpose temples. You don't erase ceremonial infrastructure unless you believe it matters. And yet, even dismantled, Sarmizegetusa doesn't feel inert. Modern measurements have found unusual electromagnetic readings in certain areas of the site. Not extreme, not dangerous, just elevated enough to be anomalous. The strongest readings tend to appear near the stone circle, especially during specific times of day, which suggests timing mattered. The Orashte Mountains themselves sit on complex fault lines. The ground here is rich in minerals known to affect electromagnetic fields. Combine that with precision stone structures, altitude, isolation, and ritual use over centuries, and you're left with a place that may have been deliberately chosen for how it felt, not just how it looked. That's the part modern analysis struggles with. Ancient builders didn't separate function from sensation. A place that altered perception was useful. A site that affected the mind was not a side effect. It was the point. Sarmizegetusa seems to have been built to do something to the people who stood within it. Not everyone experiences it. Some walk through unimpressed. Some feel nothing beyond curiosity, but others leave unsettled, quiet, thoughtful, unable to articulate what changed. That inconsistency is the most unsettling part. If the effect were imaginary, reactions would be random. If it were environmental, reactions would be uniform. Instead, it's selective, which mirrors the old Dacian belief that not everyone was meant to access certain knowledge. Today, the ruins sit exposed to the elements. Tourists come and go. No rituals, no ceremonies, no priests. And yet, the place still feels like it's waiting. Not for worship, not for belief, for activation. Sarmizegetusa doesn't present itself as mystical. It doesn't overwhelm you with grandeur. It doesn't demand reverence. It simply places you in proximity to something that feels unfinished, not because it was abandoned, but because it was interrupted. Like a system that was shut down mid-process. You don't leave with answers. You leave with questions you didn't arrive with. And perhaps that's what made it dangerous enough to dismantle, and powerful enough that even in fragments, it still refuses to be ordinary. 7. Berat, Albania. Berat doesn't overwhelm you when you arrive. It settles you. The city unfolds slowly along the Osum River. White houses stacked up the hillside. Windows facing forward like they're watching, but not judging, not warning, just present. Berat is often called the City of 1,000 Windows, and once you're there, that name stops feeling poetic and starts feeling deliberate, as if the city is designed to look back at you. On paper, Berat is a UNESCO-protected architectural treasure. Ottoman-era homes, Byzantine churches, Islamic mosques, stone streets, a castle that has been continuously inhabited for centuries. Historians celebrate it for something rare, the visible coexistence of religions, cultures, and empires without the scars you'd expect from constant conflict. But that description misses the part people struggle to talk about, because many visitors don't remember Berat primarily for its beauty. They remember how they felt there. There's a recurring phrase that comes up in personal accounts. I felt lighter, not happier, not euphoric. Lighter, as if something heavy had been loosened without effort. People describe unexplained emotional release, sudden calm after long periods of stress, physical sensations of warmth, especially near religious sites, churches, mosques, and particularly within the castle walls. Some report relief from chronic pain that fades once they leave. Others describe deep sleep, unlike anything they experience elsewhere. The strange part is how understated these stories usually are. No dramatic healings, no declarations of miracles, just quiet changes that feel real enough to be unsettling. Berat has existed at a crossroads for a very long time. Eastern and Western worlds met here. Empires passed through. Religions layered on top of each other rather than replacing one another. Christianity and Islam didn't just coexist. They intertwined socially, architecturally, and culturally. That harmony wasn't accidental. In most places, overlapping belief systems generate tension. In Berat, they seem to generate stability. Churches and mosques sit within walking distance of each other. neither dominating the skyline. Calls to prayer and church bells don't compete, they alternate. The effect is subtle, but palpable. Many visitors say the city feels balanced in a way that's hard to describe. Not neutral, not empty, balanced, as if opposing forces cancel out excess rather than amplifying it. That balance is often cited as the source of Bharat's so-called healing energy. Skeptics argue it's psychological, a calm environment, low noise, slow pace, aesthetic harmony, all factors known to reduce stress. That explanation works until you notice how specific the reports are. People don't just feel relaxed, they feel aligned. Old anxieties lose urgency. Emotional tension releases without conscious processing. Some describe the sensation of being reset, as if their internal rhythm has been gently corrected. Interestingly, these experiences often occur without expectation. Many visitors aren't looking for anything spiritual at all. They come for history, architecture, photography. The sensations catch them off guard. That lack of priming makes the consistency harder to dismiss. Bharat Castle, in particular, seems to be a focal point. The fortress sits above the city. Massive stone walls enclosing churches, mosques, homes, and courtyards that still function as living space. Walking inside feels less like entering a monument and more like stepping into a self-contained world. Sound behaves differently there. Voices soften naturally. Footsteps echo longer than expected. Wind funnels through narrow passages, producing low, steady tones that linger in the background. Some people describe a faint vibration underfoot, not constant, but noticeable when standing still. Others report a strong emotional response near the churches inside the castle, particularly those with centuries-old icons. A sense of warmth, pressure in the chest, a feeling of being held. What's unsettling is that similar sensations are reported in nearby mosques. Different symbols, different rituals, same effect. That suggests the source isn't theology, it's location. Bharat sits in a valley framed by mountains, with the river cutting cleanly through the landscape. The geography creates natural acoustic and electromagnetic conditions that are unusually stable. Minimal interference, consistent environmental rhythms. Some researchers believe this kind of setting can encourage nervous system regulation, allowing the body to exit prolonged stress states more easily. If that's true, then Bharat isn't mystical in the supernatural sense. It's therapeutic in a physiological one. But even that doesn't fully explain why people describe experiences that feel meaningful, not just calming. Some visitors report spontaneous emotional insights, sudden forgiveness, clarity around decisions they've struggled with for years. These moments don't feel forced or dramatic. They feel obvious, as if the answers were always there, and something simply removed the noise. Locals don't make a spectacle of this. They talk about the city with quiet pride, not reverence. They'll mention that people feel better here, sleep better here, heal faster here, but without exaggeration. It's treated as a known quality, not a selling point, almost like talking about good water. And maybe that's the key. Bharat doesn't radiate energy in a way that demands attention. It doesn't overwhelm. It doesn't transform you against your will. It doesn't open visions or provoke altered states. It stabilizes. In a world that constantly pulls people in opposite directions, faster, louder, sharper, Bharat feels like a place where those forces cancel each other out, where extremes soften, where the nervous system finally stands down. That kind of effect can feel spiritual even if it's entirely physical, or physical even if it's deeply spiritual. Bharat doesn't care which explanation you prefer. It doesn't advertise itself as a healing center. It doesn't promise enlightenment. It doesn't ask for belief. It simply exists, as it always has, layered, balanced, quietly intact. And when people leave, they often struggle to explain why returning to normal life feels slightly harsher than before, why noise feels louder, why tension creeps back faster. Not because Bharat fixed them, but because, for a brief time, it showed them what it feels like when nothing is pulling them apart. That's not a miracle. but it might be rarer. 8. Stonehenge, England. Stonehenge looks simple. That's the trap. A circle of stones on a flat plain. No walls. No roof. No obvious machinery. You're supposed to look at it and think primitive. Early humans doing their best with limited tools. Then you stand near it, and that assumption quietly collapses. The first thing people notice isn't awe. It's discomfort. Not fear. Not reverence. Just a low-grade physical awareness that something about the space is different. Sound behaves oddly. Wind seems to change direction inside the circle. Conversations trail off without anyone deciding to stop talking. Stonehenge doesn't dominate the landscape. It conditions it. Officially, it's described as the largest megalithic structure of its kind, built in stages over thousands of years. Archaeologists believe it was connected to sun worship, seasonal cycles, and burial practices. An ancient necropolis, a place where the dead were brought, honored, and possibly processed. That explanation is accurate and incomplete. Yes, Stonehenge aligns precisely with the solstices. On the summer solstice, the sun rises directly along its main axis. On the winter solstice, it sets in perfect alignment. These events weren't symbolic. For early farming societies, they were economic data: planting, harvesting, survival. If you could predict the sun, you could predict the year. If you could predict the year, you could control food supply. Stonehenge likely functioned as an astronomical observatory, a way to lock celestial motion into stone so it could be read by generations who would never see the sky the same way twice. But here's the part that complicates things. Stonehenge isn't just aligned with the sky. It's aligned with the ground. The stones sit above a network of underground features, natural chalk ridges, ancient pathways, and subtle geological fault lines. The blue stones themselves were transported from over 200 kilometers away, from a region known for unusual acoustic and magnetic properties. No one can explain why those stones specifically were chosen. Not local material. Not convenient material. Material that required enormous effort to move. That suggests intent beyond monument building. Researchers have discovered that certain stones at Stonehenge ring when struck, producing clear, resonant tones. Some believe this site was as much about sound as sight, a place where vibration mattered, where rhythm, resonance, and repetition played a role in ritual. If you were trying to synchronize a community, emotionally, biologically, spiritually, sound would be one of the most effective tools available. Then there's the burial evidence. Human remains found near Stonehenge show that people were brought there from distant regions, not just locals. That implies pilgrimage. People traveling long distances to be near the stones at the end of life, or perhaps at key transitional moments. That raises an uncomfortable possibility. Stonehenge may not have been just a place of death. It may have been a place of transition. Visitors today often describe sensations that mirror that idea. A heightened awareness of time. A strange emotional neutrality. Not happiness. Not sadness. Just presence. As if the usual narrative of thought pauses briefly. Some report headaches. Others report deep calm. A few report dizziness or mild nausea that fades quickly once they step away from the circle. What's strange is how short-lived the effects are. Stonehenge doesn't linger in the body the way mountains or deep forests do. It's more like a switch that flips on and then off again. As if whatever it does, it's meant to happen there, not be carried away. The farming explanation fits one layer of its function, but it doesn't explain the scale. You don't need multi-ton stones arranged with millimeter precision to track seasons. Simpler tools would suffice. The excess effort suggests that accuracy mattered beyond agriculture, that getting it exact was essential, which suggests consequences for getting it wrong. Some researchers believe Stonehenge was part of a larger ritual landscape, connected by avenues, rivers, and burial grounds. A system, not a standalone monument. One node in a network designed to regulate social and cosmic order simultaneously. If that's true, then Stonehenge wasn't just observing the sun. It was helping people align with it. That alignment may have been practical, ensuring food security and communal rhythm. Or it may have been psychological, reinforcing a shared sense of time, mortality, and continuity. Or it may have been something else entirely. What unsettles modern visitors isn't the mystery of how Stonehenge was built. It's the sense that we're still using it incorrectly, looking at it as an object when it was designed as an experience. You're not meant to analyze Stonehenge from a distance. You're meant to stand in relation to it, to feel how space tightens, how sound dulls, how attention narrows, how the sky suddenly feels closer than usual. Stonehenge doesn't ask you to believe in anything supernatural. It doesn't offer visions or revelations. It doesn't overwhelm. It simply alters your perception of time, briefly, precisely, and without apology. That's what made it valuable to an ancient farming society. That's what made it powerful enough to draw people from far away. And that's what makes it unsettling now. Because even stripped of ritual, belief, and context, the stones still do something. Not enough to prove anything. Just enough to remind you that whatever Stonehenge was built to regulate, human attention, time, or something deeper, it hasn't completely stopped working. 9. Bermuda Triangle. The energy void. The Bermuda Triangle doesn't feel hostile. That's what makes it disturbing. Most dangerous places announce themselves. Storms build. Winds rise. Instruments warn you. The triangle does the opposite. It often appears calm. Flat seas, clear skies. Normal conditions, right up until they aren't. And then things start to slip. Not violently, quietly. Ships don't explode. Planes don't crash in flames. They disappear, or they arrive without knowing how. Crews report lost time. Compasses spin or point nowhere useful. Radios fill with static that sounds less like interference and more like absence. The region itself isn't officially recognized on maps. There are no borders, no markers, no buoys warning you that you've entered something anomalous. The triangle exists more as a pattern than a place, a recurring zone of failure that stretches roughly between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. And what fails most consistently isn't machinery. It's orientation. Pilots describe moments where the horizon feels wrong, where the sky looks closer than it should, where the ocean below feels depthless, like a flat surface rather than a volume. Some report the sensation of moving without speed, covering distance without feeling motion. Others report the opposite, acceleration without effort. One of the most unsettling details across decades of reports is how often experienced professionals say the same thing afterward. Everything seemed normal. That phrase shows up again and again, until it doesn't. In some cases, aircraft that vanished reappeared hours later with no memory of the missing time. Fuel levels inconsistent with flight duration. Clocks desynchronized. In maritime cases, ships have been found drifting with no crew, no damage, and no clear signs of struggle. No storms, no distress calls, no debris fields, just absence. Standard explanations usually focus on weather, human error, or methane gas releases from the seafloor. These theories account for some incidents, but not the pattern, not the clustering, and not the reports of time distortion. There's another hypothesis that rarely gets discussed seriously because it's difficult to measure, that the Bermuda Triangle is not an energy source, but an energy void, a region where the normal background forces we rely on, magnetic stability, electromagnetic consistency, temporal continuity, are weakened or disrupted. In most places on Earth, these systems are stable enough that we don't notice them. Compasses behave. GPS locks on. Time passes at a rate we can safely ignore. But what if there are regions where those assumptions break down? The Bermuda Triangle sits in an area of unusual geomagnetic variation. True north and magnetic north align here, a rare occurrence known as agonic alignment. That alone is enough to confuse navigation systems designed with deviation in mind. But alignment doesn't explain disorientation. It doesn't explain lost time. It doesn't explain why seasoned pilots suddenly feel like their instruments are lying. Some researchers suggest that the triangle may experience transient electromagnetic anomalies, brief zones where energy behaves unpredictably. Not strong enough to fry electronics, just strong enough to disrupt calibration. If your instruments lose reliability even for a moment, you don't just lose direction, you lose trust. And once trust in instrumentation breaks down, human decision-making follows quickly. That's the mechanical explanation. The psychological one is harder to dismiss. People who pass through the Bermuda Triangle often report an uncanny emotional flattening. Panic doesn't spike when it should. Urgency feels muted. Decisions feel delayed. It's as if the mind enters a neutral state, alert, but detached. That's not how humans usually react to danger. Some survivors describe a moment where concern simply disappears, where the situation feels unreal, like watching a problem, rather than being inside it. In aviation psychology, this kind of dissociation is rare and dangerous. If the triangle induces even mild cognitive detachment, it could explain why crews fail to respond appropriately to unfolding problems. But again, that raises a deeper question. Why there? Why does this region produce the same reports across decades, technologies, and cultures? The ocean itself adds another layer of unease. The Atlantic in this region is unusually deep and dark, with powerful currents like the Gulf Stream moving vast amounts of water beneath the surface. Sound travels differently here. Signals refract oddly. Subsurface noise can be misleading, echoing where nothing should be. If there's a place where reality feels less anchored, the open ocean is already a candidate. The triangle amplifies that. Sailors have described moments where the water appears glassy and still, even when forecasts predict movement, a calm that feels artificial. Then, without warning, the environment reasserts itself violently, or not at all. Some describe passing through zones of dense fog that appear suddenly and vanish just as fast. Inside these fog banks, visibility collapses, sound dampens, and time perception warps. When they emerge, instruments are often misaligned. Fog shouldn't do that, unless it's not just fog. The idea of the Bermuda Triangle as an energy void reframes everything. Instead of something acting on ships and planes, it becomes a place where the usual rules stop acting consistently. No force pushing you away, no presence pulling you in. Just absence, and absence is harder to notice. That would explain why the triangle doesn't feel threatening, why it doesn't announce itself, why people don't react with fear until it's too late. You don't fight a void. You drift into it. What's perhaps most unsettling is that reports have declined, not because incidents stopped happening, but because modern navigation systems route around the region more carefully. Commercial airlines avoid certain corridors. Shipping lanes adjust quietly. The triangle isn't gone. It's avoided, which means we never resolved it. We just stepped around it. There's no definitive proof that the Bermuda Triangle is supernatural. No confirmed portal. No hidden technology. No singular explanation. But there is a pattern. A long, well-documented pattern of disappearance, disorientation, and distortion that doesn't fit neatly into any one box. And unlike haunted houses or ancient ruins, the triangle isn't a place you can stand in safely and observe. You either pass through it, or you don't. And if it truly is an energy void, if it represents a region where the Earth's systems thin out just enough to destabilize perception, then the most unsettling possibility isn't that something happens there. It's that nothing happens there. No signals, no feedback, no certainty. Just a temporary collapse of the invisible scaffolding that keeps reality coherent. The Bermuda Triangle doesn't attack. It doesn't chase. It doesn't warn. It simply removes the background stability we depend on and leaves human systems to fail on their own. And that may be far more dangerous than any monster story ever attached to it. 10. Mount Kailash, Tibet. Mount Kailash doesn't invite you to climb it. It dares you to understand why you're not allowed to. Rising alone on the Tibetan plateau, its shape is immediately wrong, too symmetrical, Too sharp, too deliberate. From certain angles, it looks less like a mountain formed by erosion and more like something constructed, a near-perfect pyramid of stone, isolated from surrounding peaks, as if deliberately set apart. Plenty of mountains are higher. Plenty are harder to reach. None are treated like this. For thousands of years, Mount Kailash has been considered the holiest mountain on earth by multiple religions, not just respected, but untouchable. In both Hinduism and Buddhism, it is believed to be the literal home of the gods, not symbolically, literally. And what's strange is how completely those belief systems agree on one thing. You don't climb it. Hindus believe Mount Kailash is the dwelling place of Shiva, the destroyer and transformer, the force that dissolves reality so it can begin again. Buddhists believe it is the home of Demchok, a deity representing supreme bliss and enlightenment. Different cosmologies, different myths. Same conclusion. The summit is not meant for humans. That belief isn't poetic tradition. It's enforced behavior. Despite being well within the capabilities of modern mountaineers, the peak has never been officially climbed. Every attempt has ended the same way. Aborted expeditions, unexplained illness, sudden weather shifts, overwhelming psychological distress. Even experienced climbers, people who have scaled Everest, describe an instinctive refusal that overrides ambition. Not fear, not respect. Refusal. Instead of climbing, pilgrims perform the Kora, a ritual circumambulation around the mountain. A slow, grueling walk at extreme altitude, often taking days. Some pilgrims prostrate themselves fully with each step, lying flat on the ground, standing, stepping forward, and repeating the process for miles. They don't do this to test endurance. They do it to dissolve the self. Pilgrims believe that completing the Kora cleanses lifetimes of karma. That one full circuit can erase the weight of past actions. That walking around the mountain, without touching its peak, brings one closer to spiritual liberation than any ascent ever could. And people don't describe the experience as symbolic. They describe it as physically transformative. Many report intense emotional breakdowns during the journey. Not despair, but release. Memories surface. Identities fracture. Some feel like they're being stripped down to something smaller and more essential. Others describe moments of total clarity that vanish the moment the journey ends. There's also the time problem. Pilgrims frequently report distorted perception of time around Mount Kailash. Days that feel like hours, hours that feel unreasonably long. Some claim they completed the Kora faster than should be possible given their physical condition. Others insist they lost an entire day with no memory of it. Monks don't argue with these stories. They expect them. One of the most unsettling aspects of Mount Kailash is that it doesn't behave like a normal mountain geologically. 4 major rivers, the Indus, Sutlej, Brahmaputra, and Karnali, originate near it, flowing in different directions across Asia. In myth, this is no coincidence. The mountain is described as the axis of the world, the point from which life radiates outward. In some traditions, it is said that Mount Kailash connects heaven, earth, and the underworld, a vertical bridge between realms. Again, metaphor. Until you notice how consistently people describe feeling vertically oriented there, as if their awareness is being pulled upward and inward at the same time. Pressure at the crown of the head, a sense of being observed from above, a feeling that thoughts are no longer entirely self-generated. Some describe it as bliss. Others describe it as overwhelming. A few describe it as unbearable. The mountain seems selective. There are also persistent reports of strange visual effects, shadows that don't align with the sun, light behaving oddly on the rock face. The summit often appears untouched by snow in ways that don't match surrounding peaks. Photographs sometimes show anomalies that aren't visible to the naked eye, and vice versa. None of this is dramatic enough to prove anything, but it's consistent enough to raise questions. Why does a mountain inspire such strict prohibition across cultures that otherwise disagree on nearly everything? Why do legends insist that those who attempt to climb it either die or go mad? Why does the mountain attract spiritual seekers who aren't interested in conquest at all? Some believe Mount Kailash is not a destination, but a mechanism, a place designed to induce ego death, to break down identity structures that normally protect the self. In that context, climbing the mountain would be the ultimate misunderstanding, an assertion of dominance in a place meant to erase it. That may be why the idea of reaching the summit feels wrong to so many people who get close. Not forbidden, misaligned. There's a story told quietly among monks that Mount Kailash doesn't resist climbers physically, it resists them internally. That those who approach with the wrong intention feel it first in the mind. Confusion, doubt, sudden certainty that continuing is a mistake. And most turn back. The few who didn't, according to legend, were never the same afterward. What makes Mount Kailash deeply unsettling isn't that it promises enlightenment. It's that it refuses to provide proof. There are no relics, no inscriptions, no visible machinery, no artifacts pointing to ancient technology or lost civilizations, just a mountain that sits where it always has, exerting influence without explanation. Modern science doesn't deny the mountain's uniqueness. It just doesn't know what to do with it. The altitude, isolation, and harsh environment explain some effects. They don't explain why people from radically different cultures describe the same internal experiences with nearly identical language, nor why the mountain has remained untouched when human history is defined by the urge to climb, conquer, and claim. Mount Kailash stands as a rare exception, not because it can't be climbed, but because it shouldn't be. People don't leave Mount Kailash talking about what they saw. They talk about what they lost: ego, certainty, narrative. And in some traditions, that loss is spiritual bliss, not joy, not ecstasy, but the quiet, unsettling realization that the self you arrived with was never as solid as you thought. Mount Kailash doesn't grant enlightenment. It doesn't teach. It doesn't reveal. It removes. And whatever remains afterward is what the pilgrims believe brings them closer to the gods, not by reaching the peak, but by understanding why the peak was never meant to be reached at all.